Jarrod Bleijie, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Apparently it's Channel 7 the one that's, like, you know, holding us all up, not me.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Swings on, jeez. Billy, when I start, I'm going to then put this down. All right, how's everyone going? Good morning. 2 seconds.
Is there a live view free to go live onto this LMP presser? Any of them? Cool, I'll just go on 2-1. Yeah.
Good to go. Toby, you're good to go now? ABC, everyone's good. Good morning. Good morning, Jarrod Bleijie, Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Well, today, the LNP, on behalf of the Palaszczuk Labor government, are going to be handing the key back to the Wellcamp quarantine facility. Behind me here is a $220 million Wellcamp quarantine facility, or as Queenslanders know it as Waste Camp. This was one of the worst decisions this Palaszczuk Labor government have ever made, wasting $220 million for this quarantine facility. We are in the midst of a cost of living crisis, and this facility behind us here has cost Queensland taxpayers $500,000 a day. Let me repeat that. In a cost of living crisis, this Wellcamp quarantine facility behind us has cost Queensland taxpayers $500,000 a day. In fact, the Palaszczuk government are spending $500,000 today, just when the LNP, on behalf of Anastasia Palaszczuk, are now handing the keys back because the lease expires tomorrow. Queenslanders would ask themselves the question, what would they get for $500,000 in a cost of living crisis? Where could that money be better spent? Well, the opposition have done some analysis on the $500,000 wasted at this Wellcamp quarantine facility. And for an average Queensland family, I can advise today that it would pay the rent for a Queensland family for 21 years. It would pay their electricity bill for 257 years. It would pay their car registration for 644 years. And it would pay their water bills for 947 years. That is the waste that this Wellcamp quarantine facility is costing Queensland taxpayers. So let me repeat that. For an average Queensland family who ask themselves where they would think $500,000 would be better spent, for an average Queensland family, it would pay their rent for 21 years, it would pay their electricity bill for 257 years, their car registration for 644 years, and would pay their water bills for 947 years. That's why today I am calling on Anastasia Palaszczuk, the Premier of Queensland, to finally apologise. Apologise to the people of Queensland for this gross mismanagement of Queensland taxpayers' money. Apologise to the families that can't afford to put fuel in their car and food on their table. Finally admit you got it wrong and apologise to the Queensland families for the worst decision that this Palaszczuk government have made. $220 million wasted on a Wellcamp, aka waste camp, quarantine facility. Over to you for questions.
Didn't it ever seem like a good idea?
This was a political decision. It was just a political decision. There was hotels being used for quarantine facilities in Brisbane and around the state. The federal government had already commenced the Pinkenba quarantine facility. It was a decision made just for political purposes. Who can recall the Premier saying, "Build it and they will come"? Well, look behind us. A brand new facility, $220 million, and they never came. Who can remember the Premier saying that the government, through the Deputy Premier, were coming up with some interesting ideas and some great ideas to use this quarantine facility? Well, the keys get handed back, and none of these great ideas ever eventuated. That's the reality of this huge waste of money.
Yeah, but John Wagner recently told media that Wellcamp was a good deal for taxpayers because when you look at it, look at what the federal government spent at Pinkenba, which was more than double what was spent on Wellcamp, and they haven't had a single person in there yet. Does he have a point with that?
This was not a good deal for the Queensland taxpayers who have paid $220 million for this facility. The Pinkenba facility was already owned by the taxpayer. So what should have happened at the time is Anastasia Palaszczuk should have cooperated with the federal government and built Pinkenba. And they could have built it early if they had have cooperated. It had already commenced negotiations and they had signed a memorandum of understanding with the Pinkenba facility. But the big difference is the Pinkenba facility was owned already by the Queensland taxpayer. This facility wasn't. It was leased, and now the keys are getting handed back, and Queensland taxpayers have forked out $220 million. It was a political decision made at the time by a Premier who was not future-proofing assets in Queensland, she was future-proofing her own job.
Now that it's not being used for quarantine hubs, is there anything you guys would like to see it used for? I mean, some of the ideas have been agriculture, housing, and things like that.
Well, Queensland, unfortunately, now has missed the opportunity for what this facility could be used for. It has sat idle, it has sat vacant for so many months now, years, that it hasn't been used. It was hardly even used as a quarantine facility, which it was set up to. The Premier promised Queenslanders that the money that the government invested, $220 million, or wasted, I should say, interesting ideas, homelessness, domestic violence, women suffering domestic violence to get away from perpetrators. It just wasn't used for anything. And these great ideas promised to Queenslanders never eventuated. They never did anything with it. So it just basically sat vacant. It sat idle, costing Queenslanders $500,000 a day. Now, if the government come out and say, oh, well, they think it should be used for this, it's too late. The Queensland taxpayers do not own this facility. Any opportunity for it now to be used for Queenslanders is gone.
Have you received any update from the Audit Office about its reporting to Wellcamp?
Yes, I have. The Auditor General was due to release a report in March this year that I requested the Auditor General look at this $220 million expenditure. The Auditor General confirmed in a letter to me that he was waiting on clarifying information from the Department of State Development, which did concern me, because the Auditor General said in his letter to me that the audit had basically been completed, but he was still waiting and clarifying information from the department, which makes one think whether the department and this government and this Premier and Deputy Premier were being fully cooperative with the Audit Office. I've now had confirmation the Auditor now intends to table his report in Parliament in May or June, so that's the latest on that.
So it's going to be an incomplete report or not quite?
Well, the Auditor General has obviously put a lot of time and effort into it, so and it's an independent office of government, as it should be. So he and his team have to do that job. He said it will now be tabled in May, June, which I appreciate and respect, and we'll wait the outcome of that report.
Just on another issue quickly, will firmly enshrined voice to Parliament?
I am on the record a number of times on this. I've not made up my mind yet on this issue. I'm liaising with people, consulting my community. I've also said that I do have concerns, very big concerns with the voice to Parliament, and those concerns haven't been alleviated yet.
Just one other one. There was a report this morning that Tara Hospital was left without a doctor for 6 days in a row. What does that say about the health system in Queensland?
Well, the health system in Queensland is broken. We are suffering, Queensland patients and communities are suffering a health crisis at the hands of the Palaszczuk Labor government. This Health Minister, Yvette D'Arth, should have been sacked months ago. She's not up to the job, and the government have stopped listening to Queenslanders. The government priorities are all wrong. The Premier is more focused on her own job, doing internal deals, rather than what she should be focused on, and that is fixing the health crisis. If they had a health minister doing the job, then these issues at the Tara Hospital you talk about, we've talked about maternity services at Gladstone and Chinchilla and Mackay, the maternity issues up there. These issues wouldn't be happening if you had a government not in chaos and lurching from crisis to crisis. Unfortunately, all Queenslanders are suffering, whether it's the youth crime crisis, the homelessness issue, the housing crisis, or, as we've discussed today, the absolute wastage of the government in the cost of living crisis. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Are we able to get a crop with you up against the sign? Just a bit of overlay?
Yeah, and I'm going to leave the key at the sign.